Well, on behalf of the Utah AGC and the Utah AGC Board of Directors, we want to welcome you all here today for this great presentation that Mr. Russell's going to put on for us today. We also want to recognize all of those who are here from DFCM. I see Matt Boyer here. Jim, maybe I'll ask you to introduce anybody else that's here in the crowd. We don't see anybody I recognize, but I'm sure there's others from your some spies here. So if you'll introduce those when you can. Also like to express appreciation. This is really a meeting that was put together by the Builders Committee. John Kemp, who I've called this year to be the chairman of that committee, at a sports event with his son down in Phoenix this weekend, so he was unable to attend, but we express our appreciation to that committee and all they do for the AGC and the community abroad. Also want to just take a moment to let all of you know that we have a lot of committees here at the AGC, and if any of you are interested in being on one of those committees, particularly the Builders Committee or any of the other committees, just reach out to Rich or Joey or Melissa. They'll be happy to get you signed up and involved, let you know when the meetings are, all of that. Now I'd like to formally introduce Mr. Jim Russell. I won't read a bio for Jim Russell because he's a legend in the land here. Both as the assistant director, many of us worked with him and knew him then, but now his years in the director role has been fantastic. Jim works so well with both the architect engineer community, but more importantly, I say more importantly, the Builders Committee and Subcontractor and Supplier Committee. We appreciate him very much. We appreciate his willingness to be here today and Matt Boyer's willingness to be here today and present to you the what's happened over the last legislative session and what projects we can be thinking about and planning for as they come up in the coming months and years. So Jim, we'll turn it over to you.
I can do Mr. Microphone here. So thank you. Thanks Troy and AGC for allowing us to be here or requiring us to be here, whatever it is. Troy said I have a great presentation. That's probably a little overstated, but then I realized, you know, I'm throwing red meat to dogs here. So whatever I present, you're going to be happy to hear. So we'll probably be okay. Matt Boyer over here is our assistant director over capital development. Many of you know him. We don't have any other spies in the audience, but we are taking names. So you know. So how many are subcontractors that are in here? Just so I know. You're a little shy. Come on, raise your hand. I was a sub once. All right, just so we know who we're talking to a little bit. And I've got to find the button here to push. So this legislative session was actually pretty crazy. Every legislator in the state told everybody they know, give me all your projects and I'll get them funded for you. So they ended up with about a $2 billion surplus to spend, and they had about $6 billion in requests. So it was a little difficult to manage this year. There was projects popping up in virtually every committee this year that Matt and I were like, what the heck is that? So we were scrambling, trying to make sure that we had an adequate budget for all the projects that were being presented in different committees. And so it made it a little bit difficult. In the end, most of those that made it, that were presented in other committees, didn't pass through. But they did, you know, overall, I think, Matt, we got about $1.8 billion in projects overall. So that's good news for the community here. That's why I say we've got lots of red meat for you here. So we're going to kind of go through this just a little bit. So just so you know, right now, currently that we're working on, we have 469 projects and just about $4.3 billion worth of work. that is going on. And then we have new funded projects this year, and they told me to stay here, but I can't read this screen and I can't see up there. So I'm going to try to do my best, Rich. So we have this project up at the Capitol, new North State Capitol building that is in design right now. We do have our CMGC selected there, but we do not have sub-selections yet. We received another $68 million. That's a total of just over about $210 million for that building. So we're pretty much covered there. We received additional funding at $6 million for additional behavioral health center. If those of you that are familiar with the community correction centers that Department of Corrections operates, they gave us money a few years ago. They gave us $11 million to do a $30 million project. So they've given us another $6 million each year, and eventually, hopefully this year, we'll actually be able to get that project underway. But even though we got $6 million this year, that's about a $24 million project. After many years on the list, the Sanpete or Manti Courthouse bill was funded. That one has a design that's begun on it. The DNR Lone Peak facility is the facility that's at the prison property. Unless you've been hiding under a rock, you know the prison's moving. And a new development is going there, which will be good for you all. But there are some buildings that are encumbering the land there that must go. The prison ones obviously will not be needed anymore, but the DNR Lone Peak facility there at the front door of the prison, that facility needs to be relocated. And then at the back door, we have our surplus and fleet building. That's the next project on there. Those two, we have selected other state properties that they'll move to, and we're in design on those both, right? Or just programming? We've programmed. Yeah. The DGO fleet and surplus one, if you get that job, just realize that I drive in that parking lot every day. And I can be kind of a pain in the butt, be a little bit picky. Ask Big D in my building right now. Go ahead, Rich.
So Jim, I see a lot of people with their cameras taking pictures and writing notes. We're assuming we get a copy of your slide deck.
You already have it.
Okay, and we can distribute it.
Yeah, you own it now, so you can do whatever you'd like with it. At the Developmental Center in American Fork, if you're familiar with that, there's a new comprehensive therapy building there. You're going to notice that this year is a little strange. We do not have anything started on most of these projects that were funded this year, other than maybe some of them a little bit of programming. So there's a lot of work to be done on them, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's helpful as well. The Point of the Mountain, I don't know how familiar you are with the new development there called The Point. DFCM is heavily involved in that. In fact, the property there will not be sold. It will be leased by the state. So DFCM will manage the leases there for 99 years. That's probably a little bit past my retirement date, but maybe Matt will still be around, not me. We will also be the AHJ on that site. So we'll be heavily involved for a long time. The board has selected DFCM to oversee the infrastructure like we did out of the prison. So the baseline and basic infrastructure that will go in, we're starting to receive funding for that. That's about $150 million-ish, give or take, depending on how much we put in there. We received $57 million towards that, and then we received $25 million to do the abatement and demo on site, as well as the other two projects that I mentioned earlier, which are actually part of that. Utah State or Fair Park Days of 47 Arena, we've got a little project there. Utah State School for Deaf and Blind, they funded 2 new buildings there. We've got a little bit of work to do on to determine exactly where they will be and what they will look like. But one in St. George and another one in Salt Lake City. And then our capital improvement projects, I don't know how many of you do the capital improvement projects. There's about 400 of those each year. Probably about 80 of them we delegate to between USU and U of U. So the work that you do up there for them is also part of that $191 million that we delegate to them. That was increased this year. So they used to do since I've been the director, they've gone from 0.9% of replacement value per year to 1.1 to 1.3 and now 1.5. So it's increased significantly each year, which shows that they're appreciating needing to take care of our buildings and that we're doing a good job of showing them the need and at what level they need to fund to be able to maintain and keep out in front of that capital renewal. And so that's been really good. They've been really supportive of us and we're grateful for that. And that for a lot of people in the valley and across the state is the bread and butter those projects are. Higher ed projects, the U of U School of Medicine received additional funding. If you're familiar with that health care reformation project up there, it consisted of the ACC building, the rehab, and then the medical discovery and medical education building. So the School of Medicine, the great big E building up there will come down and be replaced. That was a $285 million project when it was funded, and with escalation now it needed another $60 million commitment from the state along with additional donors. So do we know what the price tag of that will be, Matt? Completely in the high 300 range, somewhere around there. Do we have a contractor for that yet? We're just okay. We do have a CM, but not subcontractors there. Weber State received funding for building renovation and addition for the David O. McKay Center. And if anybody wants to know something specifically about this, you can ask Matt. No, ask me and I'll ask him. UTU, if you're not familiar with that, Dixie State is no longer Dixie State University, it's Utah Tech University. I'm having a hard time getting used to that, but nonetheless, UTU received a general classroom building. SUU received a music center. You're going to see a theme here. Every campus got a project, right? Legislature is really good at that these days. SUU also, they had some issues with drainage and flooding on their football field, so we've got to address issues there. UVU received funding, 80 million from the state and 30 million of their own funding for a new engineering building. The U of U, they received funding for technically for design only, although there is an intent language for them to be able to use money. We talked about this a few years ago. A few years ago, they passed Senate Bill 102, which put money in basically in a pot for each of the campuses that they can do projects with each year. And then since the legislature put that money in, they've spent it or taken it back out every year. This year, they actually doubled that in our base budget, the amount that they had in there, but then they spent it all again, which they're good at. But nonetheless, they allowed us to take funding out of that pot for them for the design, and then it just gives intent that they'll be able to use that funding going forward in some fashion for this building. So it will be design only for this next year. USU College of Veterinary Medicine, that was a complicated funding issue, but the funding is technically in place for that one. Similar to U of U, they were able to use some of that formula money in their magic little pot of money that will never exist. But then they were also given an ongoing stream for a new program that they can tap money out of there until they get that program up and going. So that project is technically fully funded. For the technical colleges this year, Bridgerland received $16.5 million for land bank to build their next building. It will be a few years. We were up at the groundbreaking for their new building there, and it's going to be a few years before they ask for a new building. But Mountain Land received $47 $48 million for a new building in Payson. Davis Tech, a new one at the, is this at the Davis campus or was this at
It's just
right at the main campus? And then Twilla Tech, they're probably the most excited people in the world other than Manti Courts to receive funding this year. They're excited to get $25 million for a new building out there. So non-state funded projects for agencies. So state funded means that it receives state appropriations. If it's a non-state funded, then it's largely a revenue bond or some other sort of a bond. Or it could just mean that it didn't come, the funding didn't come directly to us. So the VA Salt Lake VA nursing home, we're actually looking at locating this facility. It's a replacement for the building that's on the VA campus up by the University of Utah. It's not a very good facility, and during COVID, it was identified how poorly constructed and laid, not construction, but configured. And it makes it really hard for them to keep people with that are sick away from each other in that facility. The newer designs are better for that. So they received money from the state, which is matching funds for the federal government. So they received the state appropriation in our budget this year, and then they are applying for the federal government to receive. So it's 1/3, 2/3. So they'll get, they're looking at $45 million they're trying to get from the federal government to go with that. They are the only project in line right now, so there would be no problem for them getting funding for that. DNR received funding that will actually no, yeah, this went to DNR, right? That's why it's on our non-state list. The big hitter on that $76 million is $60 million for a much needed upgrade at Bear Lake Marina. Any of you that have a boat down there, you'll know how much that's needed. It's been a project that's been worked on for quite a while. There's 2 liquor stores that received additional bonding authorization for because they're just over budget. The Foothill DABC store, which is in design, it will go out to bid here pretty quickly. The Salt Lake downtown store, which also has a parking structure with it, that one was bid out, and it was significantly over budget to where we weren't able to award it. So we're gonna have to put that, I think that we have a CMGC out for that now, Matt, to help with that project. So the Foothill there is actually a $12 million project, and I think that brings us up to about 16 or $18 million on the downtown liquor store. And there's that project also has additional parking structure for an adjacent developer, so the project's quite a bit larger than that. And then we received bonding authorization for 2 new other liquor stores, one in Park City and one in St. George. I don't know what I just did. If I click this off, are we all? Oh. It's gonna blow up. I just wanted to see him run.
Anytime.
There we go.
If you want this, you can use it too.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
I need to lock my car. I think we completed that list. Uh-oh, where am I at? There we go. Okay, so higher ed, non-state funded projects. So these are largely like the same, either revenue bonds or they're projects that we did not receive the funding for directly. The USU Monument Valley, that's a much needed facility for instruction in Monument Valley. That's kind of like the end of the earth if you've been there, but somebody will be overjoyed to go there and build that for us, I'm sure. We received $5 million for that, but then USU has to come up with the other $5 million. So it's a partnership with the Navajo Nation, and we received the funding for them. Now USU is going to come up with their part. The University of Utah Impact Epicenter, that one bid out to contractor yet? That one has, but that received an additional $33 million to increase the size of that housing project. The University of Utah cannot build enough housing. Neither can really virtually Utah State or Dixie. None of the colleges really can. So we've been doing a lot of housing recently. And another evidence of that is the U of U Cowart Village fourth wing. So we finished that project a year or two ago, and we're already adding another wing onto that. The U of U mental health facility, that one we're in programming. I think we just wrapped up CMGC selection there, or we're working on it.
On the West Valley, no.
No, West Valley.
Yeah, proposal just came in the other day.
Okay, that's out for CM right now. I'm getting that mixed up with another U project. So that's a $400 million hospital. That's the first phase of 2 phases. So that's about half of that hospital. It's in West Valley City, about 3,800 south and 5,600 west. That'd be enough, much needed for that area out there. Up at USU, we received some bonding for improvements to the Maverick Stadium. We are looking at allowing USU to do that project. So if you're interested in that, it might be that we delegate that to them. And then as well as the Nora Eccles Arts and Education Edition. So if you are interested in those 2 projects, you might want to keep your eye on that and speak to Matt. I think we're looking at letting USU run both of those, are we not, Matt? The UTU, or the old DSU, we're putting a new housing project down there. And UVU, a parking structure that is a revenue bond as well. And then at the University of Utah, an indoor football practice facility, which, you know, projects up there, that starts at 62 and will probably end at about 120, but yeah. Anyway. I can tell there's a few of you that worked at the U, because you had little chuckles. See Dan's laughing over there. Okay. I keep pushing the wrong button. Okay, so this year there was a lot of concern, and as well there should be, with the legislature. I had a lot of meetings with legislative leadership on concern of all this money they're putting into projects this year and the cost escalation that we've been seeing and escalation going forward. Some of the material shortages that we're having, issues with concrete and steel and polyiso and on and on. And there was a pretty strong sentiment not to fund anything this year, just to put all of the project dollars, the state appropriations, into a big pot and just let it sit there and come back next year. I did convince them that that wouldn't be a very good idea, that it would be helpful for us to start programming and designing the projects. So what I worked out with them, and we've got a couple of series of intent language. This one was, I don't know where this one came from. This one wasn't from me, but we do need to report to the IGG and Higher Ed Appropriations Committee on how we're going to manage the projects within budget this year. But this is the big one right here. In a compromise, I said, okay, how about we don't spend any construction dollars until July 1st of 2023 on the state appropriated projects. Allow a little bit of a cooling off period, and then allow us to come into executive appropriations and lay out a plan on how we can deliver the projects and when they should be delivered. The intent of the intent language here, the intent of the date of July 1st, 2023 is simply to protect me and Matt from getting murdered by all of the people in higher ed that want their buildings and they want them now. So we will present a plan in June to the Executive Appropriations Committee. We are asking and reaching out to the community here, the Builders Committee, to help us develop that plan and come up with some solutions to help mitigate some of the escalation we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of our projects, we're only getting one bidder right now. And so we're thinking that maybe by actually putting a schedule out there so that you all know when our projects are coming out. That might be helpful. I know that the private sector, sometimes they go through Intermountain Contractor or whatever it's called now, and months in advance when the projects are coming. We don't do as good a job at publicizing that. So I'm not sure what all we can come up with. We'd like to work with your folks that are really good at determining what the escalation might be. And we really want to take a look at some of the issues like concrete and steel and that. Are they short-term issues? Will they bear themselves out in the next year or not? What are our opinions on that? But like I say, we have to present a plan on how we'll present those projects. So by no means it's going to stop the projects, but it was a little bit of a pause. But at the same time, it's not terribly concerning to me because, as you noticed, most of those projects are new and we don't have them programmed or designed yet anyway. So it really probably will not slow down any of the projects. But we do need to cross that hurdle. And I think, Rich, we have that on April 4th.
Yeah, our builders committee's meeting with Jim's team and his leadership folks on Monday, April 4th. I think it's 2 p.m. here at our place.
So Matt is trying to work with the project managers and get an idea of, I showed you quite a bit of work we still have underway right now, right? To try to schedule that out on when projects that are still to bid this year, when they'll go out, and just try to look at the big picture and see how we can get better coverage on projects, both from the contractor level and from the subcontractor level. So it would be great to have both there, Rich. Every year for the last 6 years, we've been getting, whenever we go to the legislature, every year they accuse us of building Taj Mahals at the higher ed campuses. Some of you have heard that, right? That some of the buildings are pretty nice. Probably the nicest buildings are the ones that are built with revenue bonds. And who wants to tell the Huntsman Foundation, who's building how many projects right now? 3 large projects right now that they're funding, and so I tell the legislature, do you want me to tell the Huntsmans that they can't have their building nice since they're paying for square footage than they have, and that maybe they should be looking at, some of the campuses are starting to look at more renovations and repurpose rather than just brand new buildings. So because this has been an issue for quite some time, we're also addressing that this year. In a different way. So Senate Bill 82, many of you are familiar with the State Building Board, and that the Senate Bill 82 is basically the DFCM statute, and in there the building board was eliminated. This was done at the request of Governor Cox's transition team. When they came in, we had given them some information on how the responsibilities of that board had diminished, and they asked us to look at how we could remove that board and put their duties in other areas and make that work. So to their request, that was the emphasis for this bill. But we also within that bill put in language. So for state agency, DFCM controls their space. For higher ed, that controls space is the Board of Higher Education, and for tech colleges, the Board of Higher Education as well. And for courts, it's the administrative office of the courts. So that's always put us in a rough situation when we're trying to have input on projects, particularly projects that are funded by the institutions. So the language in the statute now says that they have the control of their space, provided that they cooperate with DFCM in establishing standards and then allowing us to hold them to those standards. So it's kind of a by default, right? So we've got a large undertaking over the next year or so to do space utilization, not just for the classrooms, but for all the buildings and all of the campuses across the state. And then also, once we kick that off, then we need to do the same thing for courts facilities. Rich?
Jim, does that also affect the method of delivery to the local universities and such, pick how they want to deliver and what that process looks like?
They don't know. This wouldn't have a lot to do with that. They don't necessarily pick, they input. That's Matt, that's our decision on the delivery method. It is a little bit hard, I will tell you, to make some of the campuses very excited about design build or design bid build because of, well, let me step back. Some of the campuses are just a little more complicated than the others. Their user groups are really complicated, and so it makes it hard to do some of the delivery methods because the decisions come very slow and very late. And so that's a problem for design build, and that's a problem for design bid build. So that's why you see a lot of CMGC on some of the campuses. But this could affect it a little bit, Rich, because this allows us to have a little bit more control, if that's what you're
Well,
You're
I guess
getting
what I'm
to-
getting at is right now, you guys oversee it all. And there's a lot of faith in the way you manage that.
yeah.
And if DFCM goes away in favor of local control, higher ed, or whomever, we just need to know if we gotta keep our eye on that ball. If they default say, well, we're just going to do it this way and give it to these people, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I would say that there's virtually no sentiment right now. Maybe the higher ed campuses want to be their own island, but there is zero support for that in the legislature and in the governor's office. They have established pretty good confidence in us, and they do not have that with the institutions. So that if that happens, like other states, that could happen, but it will be in the future. We have worked with some of the campuses to partner or to delegate some projects to see how they do. And you know, it's been kind of mixed sometimes. And so we're still working through that. I will tell you that through Senate Bill 82, the delegation, the categoric delegation that the University of Utah has for $10 million and USU has $4 million are now completely at the discretion of my position or the DFCM director. And not the building board. If that's any indication of where the confidence lies right now. Let's see. So we've been working with K through 12 a little bit to look at some of their processes, construction wise, maintenance, all the way down through their entire program, through both design, construction, standards, use of standards, lack of standards, all the way down through their maintenance program on how they change light bulbs. So that's been an ongoing process, but sorry, I'm talking about the wrong one. I'm going to go ahead one more. So this year, they have, there's a fund that's funded by, I think, SITLA and some other sources. They have about $250 million at this time in a pot that goes through the school districts, and it accumulates more funding every year. So in HB 475, they established what's called the Small Districts Capital Development Fund, and it's administered by the Board of Education, but DFCM plays a role in determining the process and in determining the projects, and could play a role, likely play the role in oversight of the projects that and the funding that flows through that. So as much as we don't want to do K through 12, we're kind of getting pushed into that just a little bit. But it's with state funding, not with the, so if you're doing K through 12, don't alarm a sound, right? Or don't sound the alarms here. This has nothing to do with the tax, you know, the property tax funded projects the districts do. There are just some districts that are 80% federal lands, and they virtually do not have the ability to raise the tax revenue to build new buildings. And the last time some of them had buildings were when the state paid for them. So this year in that fund, there is additional funding they can put in it from year to year. So they set up the fund and they set up the vehicle and the process. They put $50 million in one time. They'll probably add one-time funding each year. But this funding is intended to go farther than $50 million. It's intended to give them the ability to leverage that and raise whatever funding they can on their end through tax revenue as well. And so this is not to pay, at some circumstance, it may pay for our entire building, but the intent is for it to go, the dollars to go longer. This just to help them get over the finish line. HB 121, I know you're all excited over this one. Water conservation, there's a couple of requirements in this bill, and that is that new facilities have less than 20% of the project be turf, less than 20% being turf. There's not a really great amount of information on there. I mean, what does that mean? Does that mean the entire site of the project? We're not really sure, but we're just trying to work through that just a little bit. But it also required us to report on behalf of all state agencies, their water usage. So statewide, we have just under 3,900 buildings that we have to report on, many of which do not have water meters, or they're not under a jurisdiction that can feed us electronic data. So this is going to be a lot of manual work, and it's also going to be some capital improvement work to put metering in place, and also to put irrigation controls in place to manage the watering exterior on facilities. So that's something that will be ongoing for us to work on for the next 4 or 5 years. I think I don't know if it's the award, but when this bill first came out, I gave a rather large fiscal note that didn't make people too happy, but my first pass at this was a $556 million fiscal note to accomplish that. Now they revised it a little bit and said, let's just look at other measures and other ways we can get to that. But it emphasized the fact that to do this on all of our buildings is a really big, it's a really big cost and expenditure. So we'll do our best to get there and see how we can get there without spending $550 million, but that's where we're at on that. And like I said, with the USDV schools, we need to understand their need a little greater and where they might be located before we start. And we don't have properties for those 2 buildings, so we've got a little bit of work. They'll probably be a little bit delayed on delivery. With that, I don't have anything else. Do we have any questions for Matt?
Three questions. Gotta say something.
Thank you.
Matt says thank you. That's it. Everybody just wants to go to work. Rich, you've already raised your hand a couple of times.
So currently, when the estimates come out and they're wherever they're at, and the pricing of the proposals coming above that, how are you handling that delta currently? Is there anything we can do to help?
Yeah, you can quit bidding so high.
What's that?
It's fully in your control, Rich.
Yeah. Other than that part.
Oh, okay. That's what we really need to discuss, right? Are there things that we can do that can help with the projects being so far over budget? And trying to manage within the budget that we have right now going forward. You know, if costs keep going up the way they are, there's going to be the point where the legislature says, hey, we just don't want to build any more buildings for a while. And they're pretty close to that this year. So it actually really is a big deal that we get our arms around it a little bit. We've seen, Matt, I think now since 2015, up before last year, it was about 38% escalation. And then we've seen 13 this last year on our projects. So that's a lot. And then we're looking at 13% going again this year. So prices are significantly higher. And we always battle that. They compare our total project cost to what the developers on the legislature pay to build just a shell of a building. So it's always a battle when they tell us we spend twice as much, although we hire you just like they hire you, and we hire the same designers they hire. So anyway,
Plug, so did I hear that right? You plug a percentage moving forward to kind of guesstimate, so are you using 13% escalation for these projects that we're looking down the road on?
okay, so yes, we do, but I gotta be honest with you. We thought it might be 13%, but we only put 8% in. And I'll tell you why that is. And that is, sometimes when you're developing the capital budget estimates, it's as much a political number as it is an actual number. And, so that means we've got to work hard to hit that. And that might mean a little bit of a reduction in them. But, Matt knows what I'm talking about. It's like we get really killed on the prices and the cost per square foot. And so sometimes it pushes a lot back into the designers and onto you to hit that budget. We understand that, and we appreciate the work that you do to help us get there. And honestly, we do a pretty good job of hitting there most of the time. We're really, really struggling on our capital improvement projects. Seems like the smaller subs and the smaller contractors are struggling to hit budgets. Maybe it's getting materials from the vendors or whatever, but we're seeing a lot of those projects literally come in double the budget one day and then on budget the next. So there's no rhyme or reason to that. We're seeing that a little bit in some of the smaller development projects. So we're just trying to figure out how we can get our arms around that a little bit more. We think some of that is competition, getting a little more competition. But there might be other factors that you're aware of that we're not. And we're just asking for help. And I can't emphasize this enough. This help is to benefit you going forward, because we do quite a bit of work, and if the legislature paused on any particular year or two, that would have a great effect on our economy. So we're trying to keep things moving forward as much as we would like a year off. We know that that's not really what we're pushing for, right? Because we know what an effect that would have. But we do need to figure out how to manage it. Does that answer your question, Rich?
I think so.
That, when we do carry a reserve fund, when projects are under, or any retained earnings on a project, any reserve, anything that's not spent on projects, it goes to a fund and then we can pull from that. But that we have limited ability there, and we're not seeing a lot of projects coming under budget and not using all of their funding. So it's really starting to wear itself out on our ability to cure those things. And that was shown in some of the projects that I showed you today. We had to go back and ask for additional funding, or thankfully we didn't go ask for additional appropriations this year. The projects that we asked for were additional revenue, bonds and authorization, which is a lot easier to get than cash. But we're really facing that situation where next year it could be we're asking for a lot of appropriations, and so we're trying to head that off. Anybody else?
Water conservation, is there any thought on ripping up existing turf or building new projects with zero turf heading forward?
Yeah, so the question was on water conservation. Is there thought of building new projects with zero turf and also ripping up turf? So the $550 million that I mentioned was largely ripping up turf to get to that 25%. And that's the impact. I mean, to reduce 20% or 25% of it, I only went reducing 10% of the turf and figured the rest would come in measures. So that is a really big number. And we've been looking at that for quite some time on our capital improvement program. How can we start to reduce that? If you drive down to where our building is, the Calvin Rampton building, I'm not very good at golfing anymore, but I don't think I could hit a driver from the curb to the building from that berm of grass. And, we realize that we need to do better and do something with some of those areas, but it's really expensive to do. And you can't really pay for that out of the water savings. It would take way too many years to do that. So we have to have another funding source to do it. So we're trying to figure that out, Brad, but I don't know what the answer to that is. Although any new projects that we're doing, we're trying to resolve the issues with those projects when they come online, whether they're a new building or a remodel. So we will be spending more, trying to put in less sod. Now, there could be an exemption if we're doing a football field or practice field or a park or something, then, you know, you can exceed that 20% for a reason. But it's a big issue. How many of you tried to put a boat in the water the last few years? Yeah. Or like me, you didn't even try last year. It was pathetic. So we do have a real issue to resolve there. And, you know, we're trying to take that serious and figure out ways we can do that. Mr. Grimal?
It's a little unrelated, but did the legislature also put something in place to restrict the cities and counties' requirements for developments, also restricting their water usage in their developments?
Yeah, so the same legislation that we received, there were other bills that did that for cities and counties and municipalities. You can't hear? Okay. Oh, you couldn't. So Jim Grimal asked if the bill or other bills address this with cities and counties, municipalities. And I would say yes, and even associations. So where you have cities that are requiring turf in the front lawn or in that front yard and that, it's going to be optional. So a homeowner could put in xeriscaping if they want and not be required to put in grass. And that goes all the way from a city, county, municipality, and even an HOA can't require that anymore. So there, not this particular bill, but there was other legislation that affected that. And also the 20%, no more than 20% turf.
With the dissolution of the building board, how will projects be prioritized? Is there a process for that in place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So how will projects be prioritized? So part of the reason why the building board's role was minimized a little bit, when the SB 102 passed a few years ago that put money in a pot for the institutions, it changed how those projects were prioritized because they have to, they developed what was called a dedicated project and a non-dedicated project. A dedicated project would go to that funding, and a non-dedicated project or projects that go outside of that would go through the normal process. So as we went through that, the dedicated projects are actually prioritized by the Board of Higher Education. The non-dedicated projects are prioritized by them, but then they were also supposed to be prioritized by the building board. However, the building board had to maintain the rankings from the Board of Higher Education. Is that silly? Right? So it didn't make a whole lot of sense. And actually, Matt, the last couple of years, we didn't even have the building board prioritize them. We just passed the Board of Higher Ed through. And then for state agencies, there was an audit a few years ago at the same time as this SB 102 that looked at higher ed building costs. And they really took the building board to task. In that same session, along with this SB 102, there was an audit that really said they weren't doing a very good job of prioritizing. It was a little too subjective and not on the merits of the project. And then also in that same session, capital improvements that had been with DFCM completely moved to the building board to prioritize. They moved that back to us as well in that session. So there were some significant changes there. But when that, to address the audit, Matt and I, we developed kind of a process for us to take the technical information that's submitted on the projects and kind of rank them, but just rate them on the technical aspects and the need, their space utilization, how they're using the space and all that. And we've done that for the last 3 years, and it's largely passed through to what the building board hasn't modified that a lot. They've taken our numbers and then added one more subjective score to it. So basically the answer is that what Matt and I have developed is just how they'll be ranked in the future. All good questions. Is that it? Am I off the hook now?
Any more questions?
How's your bracket? Did you have Kentucky? Did you have St. Peter's?
I didn't do a bracket. The only time I ever won anything was at a raffle. They were giving out like microwaves and sets of golf clubs, and I won a package of light bulbs. So It was a nice 4-pack, 75-watt bulb, so that tells you my luck. I don't even, Matt, you got one? I'm like the worst person for winning anything, so just another frustration I don't need. How about yours?
Thank you for your time and the
Yeah.
information.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just wrap up by telling you thank you again. We appreciate, we feel like we have a pretty good working relationship with our AEC community. We're grateful for the input that we get from you. You know, we try to hear what your concerns are, and every once in a while, we might even give you one of your concerns every once in a while. But we're grateful for the partnership, and we're just grateful for what you do. I think that, you know, there's a lot of confidence in what we do right now, but what we do, we can't do without you. And we recognize that, and we recognize that we have great designers, we have great contractors, we have great subcontractors that work really hard and take a lot of pride in their work and what they do. And so we appreciate and applaud all of you. So thank you very much.
Okay, well, once again, we want to thank Jim for his leadership and his willingness to come here and educate us. And Jim's always been willing to come and meet with the AGC leadership committees, others, to help us understand DFCM better and what we can do to help them better. And it's our opportunity to also relate to them what things we're looking for them to maybe do a little bit better. So we appreciate that two-way street, Jim and Matt. But one more round of applause for Matt and Jim for coming here today. So I also want to just recognize DFCM, Jim and Matt and their entire team for the Salt Lake, or for the Utah prison. What an amazing project. It's finishing up this year, as many of you know, and there's been a lot of contractors, subcontractors participating in that. And I was able to walk that and see that recently, and just what an amazing, amazing project. One of the biggest in the history of DFCM, and they've done a really nice job putting that together and getting that wrapped up. So that's going to be fun, and it'll open up 400 plus acres of land for new buildings out there, which is going to be super, super exciting. So Rich, did you have something?
Yeah, just in closing, just want to remind everybody, check your AGC in action. Look at your inbox. On May 25th, in this room will be our meet and greet with DFCM and all of their team. 200 or 300 people, ACEC, AIA, AGC. So stay tuned. And then we'll do another in November in St. George. Okay, so
May 25th? May 25th, meet and greet, DFCM here. 11:30 to 2:30. That's been a wildly successful event in the past, so please come and join us and watch for that. And then St. George in November, date to be announced. All right, thanks very much for your attendance, and we'll see you soon.